Fire on board the USSR Minsk. That's right, the Kiev-Class aircraft carrier just outside Shanghai has been burning since 4 p.m. on Friday afternoon. It's burned through the night. Motorists on the Nantong Bridge from Shanghai into Jiangsu could see clouds of billowing smoke coming out of the battle cruiser, engorged in billowing flames and smoke. The fire has been so severe that the radar towers and even the bridge on the port side has completely melted off into the estuary below. Firefighters from the Chinese Coast Guard have been battling through the night to try and extinguish the flames, but this towering inferno just will not be extinguished. Fortunately, there have been no casualties so far, and the workers who were renovating the ship have escaped. However, the police are still investigating how the fire could have started. This is not the first fire that has occurred on the ship. As well as the blazing inferno which is taking place right now, there was a smaller fire on the ship in 2023 which actually wiped out the torpedo deck. As you may know, this is a Kiev-Class aircraft carrier, which has been abandoned and left in the Yangtze River just out Shanghai for about the past 10 years and has become an Burbex legend here in China. With all that in mind, let's go into a few more details about the history of the ship and how this blaze might have happened. As I mentioned, the first alerts that there were a fire occurred about 4 p.m. on Friday afternoon when motorists coming from Shanghai into Nantong across the Nantong Bridge saw billowing flames and black smoke coming off the ship. This towering inferno has actually caused the radome on top of the ship above the bridge to melt. The bridge, the actual bridge itself on the stern side, has actually melted off into the sea. From these videos, you don't really get a scale of how large this ship is. I explored this ship about 4 years ago. We actually climbed into the radome, and you can see that in the video in the top right hand corner. This video will give you a real sense of not just how large the ship is, but actually how extensive the damage to the ship really is. Chinese Coast Guard fire boats have actually been battling the blaze for the past 36 hours. An interesting fact about the Chinese Coast Guard is it's actually run by the military, and actually the fire service is actually run by the military. You can see that there's 2 military groups battling hard to put out this fire on this military ship. However, they will have their work cut out for them. This ship, which was built in the 1970s, has actually started to break down a lot. There's a lot of combustible materials and fuel on the ship, which will just add to the blaze. It's an exponential blaze. It will just grow and grow and grow. There is no way they're going to put this fire out without a fight. Fortunately, there have been no casualties. The workers who were working on board to renovate the ship, they all managed to escape, but the police suspect that it might have been because of a fault caused by these workers that the ship set on fire in the first place. In fact, this is not the first fire that's taken place on the ship. Last year, in 2023, the torpedo deck was actually wiped out by a fire. And this is because the ship, which was built in the late 70s, a lot of the electrical circuitry and a lot of the materials on board have started to break down, cause these electrical malfunctions, which can lead to fire. And that's what wiped out the deck last year. This has not stopped urban explorers trying to get on board the ship, though. If you've not seen the video of me exploring the ship, you can see that in the top right hand corner. And of course, more recently, Bob from Exploring the Unbeaten Path has also been aboard the ship. Earlier this year, Nomadic Alex and me, we tried to get on the ship as well. It's about 100 meters from the shore and it's in an estuary. It's very difficult to gauge how difficult it is to get over there. Actually, there are reports that 2 people drowned trying to swim over to the ship. And actually, Alex and I, who swam over there earlier this year, we went over in wetsuits. Current was so strong and it's so cold and we got dragged down. We were lucky to get away. If you want to see more about that, check out Alex's video in the top right hand corner. But for those of you who want to know more of the history of the ship, this is actually a Kiev-Class aircraft carrier, which was one of the mainstays of the USSR Navy during the Cold War. It was commissioned in the early 70s. The ship saw service as part of the USSR Navy right from 1978 to 1994, and it was a kind of bully ship. It would just rock up on enemy shores and blitz the shore into submission. Unfortunately, in 1994, during maneuvers in the Mediterranean, the port stern of the Minsk actually got blown off. There was a huge explosion. You can see this in the way that it's been repaired where the explosion was. And this was because of faulty torpedoes. The torpedoes on board hadn't been replaced for more than a decade, and they started to leak torpedo juice. And some of this torpedo juice leaked out and caused an explosion which blew off the port stern of the ship. As a result of this, the ship was going to be scrapped. But then South Korea said, hey guys, let's buy that ship. They bought the ship in with the intention of learning as much as they could about it to rebuild the ship and add it to the Korean fleet. However, when they were investigating the ship, they went down into the hull right at the bottom, and then they found that the dodgy torpedoes that had been leaking had all been covered in a layer of cement. Now, this presented a problem for them because if they tried to remove the cement, the torpedoes could explode. They were just left there, all these torpedoes. And I'm not talking about one or two, we're talking about hundreds of torpedoes all encased in cement in the hull of that ship. When environmentalists found out about this, they said, hey, we don't want this in our waters, get rid of it. And of course, there was another buyer, China. And a state-owned company in the north of China towed the ship into China. This state-owned company with the military looking over their shoulder took notes, made blueprints, copied the ship, right? They took all the schematics to build their own ships. And try to remember, those dodgy torpedoes are still down in the hull the whole time. After that, the ship went up in auction and was sold to a Chinese arcade game company. They moved the ship down to Shenzhen in the south of China, and they turned it into Minsk World, which was an amusement park where people could go visit the ship. You could sit on top of missiles. You could take a picture as the captain dressed up in like the captain's uniform. I actually did that back in 2007. One of the best features of it was that there was a MiG 23BN jet fighter on board. However, that jet fighter did not belong on that ship. The Minsk was a vertical takeoff aircraft carrier, which meant it was okay for aircraft like helicopters and yaks to take off vertically, but it didn't have horizontal takeoff. Minsk World actually operated for quite a long time, but then of course figures for visitors started to drop off and they realized it was time to close. So in 2016, the ship was moved from Shenzhen up to the Yangtze River just outside Shanghai. It's about 50 kilometers outside of Shanghai, and it was put in an estuary in the middle of a marsh. And the intention was that they were going to renovate the ship and they were going to build this complex around it, like a military education center for citizens to come and learn about the military, to encourage people maybe to join the Navy, to join the army. That project went bankrupt. Basically, it was probably corruption, some kind of bankruptcy. What happened is that in this marshy area, this ship was just left to sit and rot. This, of course, attracted a lot of urban explorers. Like I said, I've explored this before. You can see that in the top right-hand corner. Bob from Exploring the Unbeaten Path has also explored it before. This ship is not without its dangers. One of the main dangers is that those torpedoes are still down in the hull of the ship, encased in cement. Last year, as I mentioned, there was an electrical fire on board which wiped out the torpedo deck. But if the fire now manages to get down into the hull and maybe crack the cement, the whole of the Minsk could explode, which is why crews are battling this fire so hard. In closing, the Minsk is a real icon, not just for military enthusiasts, but also for urban explorers. This is the final death knell for this ship. I really feel like once this fire is out, once the smoke has cleared, the Minsk is dead. If you want to find out more about the Minsk, be sure to check out my other videos where I've explored the Minsk and also given a history of the Minsk. Be sure to check out this great video where Drew and I explore the USSR Minsk.